Hey everyone, welcome back to another one of our deep dives in this IT lecture series.
Always a pleasure to be here.
Today we'll be taking a look at this presentation, Giving IT Back, coming straight from Basil's IT Knowledge Bunker.
A great resource.
So we're going to be building a robust cybersecurity framework, kind of like, building a digital fortress.
Yes, to protect all those precious IT assets.
Exactly, which are, let's face it, more valuable now than ever, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely, and that's why we need to make sure they're well protected.
Okay, so let's jump into the first slide here.
Yeah.
This one's all about security policies and procedures. I like to think of security policies like the blueprints for your digital fortress.
That's a great analogy.
What do you think?
I like it because they really do lay the foundation for everything, defining the security landscape, outlining roles and responsibilities, setting expectations for behavior. Without clear policies, you're basically trying to build a fortress without knowing where the walls should go.
Exactly. Or how thick they need to be.
Right, exactly.
It'd be a mess. And it's also like you wouldn't build a skyscraper, based on blueprints from the 1800s.
Oh, absolutely not.
Things have changed a lot.
Times change. Technology changes.
Your security policies need to keep up, too. They got to be updated regularly to keep pace with the ever-evolving threat landscape.
Oh.
I remember this case study, actually, from a few years back. This major financial institution, big name, got hit with a data breach, and guess what? Their password policy hadn't been updated in, like, a decade.
Oh, wow.
I mean, they were still asking for 6-character passwords with no special symbols.
It's like leaving the front door wide open.
With a sign that says free money inside.
Pretty much.
Crazy, right? So it's important to, avoid those kind of outdated policies. What would you say are some best practices to make sure those policies are up to date and actually effective?
Well, regular reviews are absolutely essential.
Right.
I would say schedule them annually at the very least, or even more frequently if you're in a high-risk industry.
Makes sense.
And it's really important to involve stakeholders from across the organization. IT, legal, HR, even end users.
Oh, yeah. Get everyone involved.
Yeah, because you want to get those diverse perspectives and make sure those policies are actually practical and you can actually enforce them.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You want everyone to have a voice, right?
Yeah.
In building those walls and making sure they're strong enough to withstand, any attack.
Exactly.
All right, well, let's move on to slide 2 now.
Sounds good.
This one's all about risk management strategies.
Okay.
Now, this is where things start to get really interesting.
Yeah.
Because we're going to start thinking like the attackers.
Right. We're getting into the mind of the enemy.
Exactly. So risk management is all about, identifying those potential threats, assessing their impact, and then developing some strategies to mitigate those risks.
You got it.
It's kind of like a game of chess, wouldn't you say?
I love that analogy.
Where you're trying to, anticipate your opponent's moves, and you're trying to protect your most valuable pieces.
Absolutely. You have to be strategic.
So let's say we've identified a potential risk. For example, we find a vulnerability in our network. What would be, the next step?
Well, the next step would be to assess the potential impact. So we need to figure out how likely is it that this vulnerability will actually be exploited, right? And then if it is exploited, what's the worst case scenario that could happen?
Right. Got to think about the worst case.
Yes. And this impact assessment, it really helps us prioritize our response. We want to focus our resources on the threats that pose the greatest danger. We can't address everything all at once.
Right. So it's not about just, fixing every single vulnerability that pops up. It's about being strategic and allocating resources where they'll have the biggest impact.
Exactly. It's all about prioritizing.
All right. So let's say we've assessed the impact of this vulnerability.
Yeah.
What would you say comes next?
Well, next, we need to choose a mitigation strategy. And there are a few options here, actually.
Okay, well, let's break those down.
Sure. So first, we could try to avoid the risk altogether. This could mean maybe discontinuing a certain service that is particularly vulnerable or stopping storing sensitive data in a particular system.
So it's like removing a valuable piece from the chessboard, right?
Exactly. It's no longer at risk.
It's out of there. What are some other options we have?
Another option would be to transfer the risk to a third party.
Okay.
So, for example, we might outsource our data storage to a cloud provider.
Right.
With, specialized security expertise.
Okay, so it's like hiring a bodyguard.
Exactly.
For your valuable piece, someone else takes on the responsibility of protecting it.
You got it.
So we're passing the buck, but in a responsible way.
That's right.
What would you say the next strategy would be?
The next strategy would be acceptance.
Acceptance.
Yeah. So sometimes, the cost of mitigating a risk outweighs the potential impact.
Right.
So we might choose to just accept the risk, knowing that it's a possibility, but maybe it's not a major threat.
So it's like acknowledging that you might lose a pawn in the chess game.
Exactly.
Right, but you're focusing on protecting your more important pieces.
Exactly.
Okay, so we're choosing our battles. What's the final strategy?
The final strategy is mitigation. And this is where we're actually implementing security controls to reduce the likelihood or the impact of a risk. So we might install firewalls, implement intrusion detection systems, or encrypt sensitive data, things like that.
So we're fortifying the castle walls.
Exactly. Adding moats and drawbridges to make it harder for those attackers to get in.
Right. So this mitigation strategy, would you say this is probably the most common one?
Yeah, I would say so.
Because we can't always, avoid or transfer every single risk.
That's right. And mitigation really is the bread and butter of cybersecurity. It's about, layering those defenses to create a robust security posture.
So we've identified the risks, assessed their impact, and chosen our mitigation strategies. What comes next on this risk management checklist?
Well, next up is continuous monitoring. We can't just set up our defenses and forget about them. The threat landscape is constantly changing, so we need to be vigilant. Constantly scanning for new threats, new vulnerabilities. It's like having security cameras and guards patrolling your fortress 24/7.
Right. You got to keep those guards alert.
Exactly.
Makes sense. You can't just assume your walls are going to hold forever.
Right.
Got to be proactive.
Absolutely.
Adaptable. Okay, let's move on to slide 3. This one's called compliance and regulations. Now, this can be, a little bit of a dry topic sometimes, but it's absolutely essential.
Oh, it is.
What do you think?
Because, well, ignoring compliance can be a very, very costly mistake.
Right, costly in a lot of ways.
Financially, reputationally, it's a big deal.
It is. I always say it's like showing up to airport security without your ID or your boarding pass.
Yeah.
You're not going anywhere fast.
Nope.
You might even end up on a watch list. And the world of compliance is full of acronyms and regulations. You've got your GDPR, IPA, PCI DSS.
It's a lot to keep track of.
It can feel a little overwhelming, right?
It can. But, at the end of the day, all of these regulations are really just about protecting sensitive information.
Right.
And ensuring responsible data handling.
So let's break down a few of those acronyms. What do you think?
Sounds good.
So GDPR, for example, this one's all about protecting the personal data of individuals in the European Union.
Right.
It's a pretty comprehensive regulation, I'd say, and it's got some serious teeth,
Oh, yeah.
Companies can face some pretty hefty fines if they don't comply.
Absolutely.
And then there's IPIA, which is all about protecting health information in the United States.
Right.
So if you're dealing with medical records or other sensitive health data, you got to make sure you're IPA compliant.
Absolutely.
And then there's PCI DSS, which is all about securing payment card transactions.
That's a big one for businesses.
It is, especially for businesses that are processing credit card payments.
Right. Yeah.
You don't want to end up on the front page of the news for a data breach that exposes all your customers' financial information.
Definitely not.
So with all of these different regulations, what's the key to navigating this complex regulatory landscape? What would you say?
I would say the key is to develop a clear compliance strategy.
Okay.
Think of it like a checklist. You need to make sure you're ticking all the boxes for each regulation that applies to your organization.
Right. It's like that checklist you go through before you go on a trip.
Exactly.
Make sure you've got everything, you got your passport, you got your ticket.
Yeah.
Make sure you're good to go. And I guess, just like with security policies, regular audits are essential to make sure you're staying on track.
They are. They really help you identify those areas where you might be falling short and provide, recommendations for improvement. It's like getting a checkup, but for your security posture. It's much better to catch those issues early on before they become, big problems.
Right. So compliance is essential, but it can feel a little bit overwhelming. What's the best way for organizations to approach it without, getting completely overwhelmed?
I would say start by understanding which regulations actually apply to your industry and the types of data that you handle.
Okay, that makes sense.
And then you can develop a framework for implementing the necessary controls and procedures.
Right.
And don't be afraid to seek expert guidance,
Right.
There are consultants and resources out there
They can help you out. Yeah.
to help you navigate those complexities of compliance.
Okay, so we've talked about policies, risk management, and compliance. Let's move on to slide 4. Security awareness training. Now, this is where we shift our focus from, technology to people.
Yeah, this is a big one.
Because, well, let's be honest, humans are often the weakest link in the cybersecurity chain.
That is true. But, they can also be your strongest asset.
No, interesting.
Employees are on the front lines. They're interacting with data and systems every single day. If they're aware of the risks and trained to identify and respond to those threats, they can be such a powerful force for security.
I like that, turning potential weaknesses into strengths.
Exactly.
But let's face it, traditional security awareness training can be a bit dry, don't you think?
Oh, yeah.
Like long lectures, boring PowerPoints, not exactly the most engaging way to learn about cybersecurity.
No, not at all. And that's why it's so crucial to make security awareness training engaging and relevant to employees' roles.
Okay, so how do we do that?
Well, you can use things like interactive simulations, gamified learning, real-world examples. These are all great ways to really capture their attention and make that information stick.
Yeah, it's like that saying, tell me and I forget. Teach me and I may remember. Involve me and I learn. And another important aspect of this kind of training is testing, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Because you need to make sure employees are actually retaining the information.
Right.
And applying it in those real-world scenarios.
Right. It's like fire drills.
Okay, yeah.
You practice evacuating the building so that you're prepared in case of a real fire.
Right, right. So we're talking about regular training, engaging content, periodic testing to reinforce that knowledge. What are some other best practices for building a strong security awareness culture within an organization? What would you say?
Well, communication is key, I would say. You need to keep employees informed about current threats and security updates. Make security a regular topic in team meetings and company-wide communications. And encourage employees to report any suspicious activity. They're your eyes and ears on the ground.
Right. It's all about creating that culture where security is everyone's responsibility.
Exactly. It's not just the IT department's job.
Right. It's everyone's job. All right. Well, let's move on to slide 5, governance and leadership. Now, this one might seem a little bit abstract.
It can seem that way.
But it's really, really crucial.
It is, because security starts at the top.
What do you mean?
The tone set by an organization's leadership, it has a direct impact on its security posture.
Right. It's like that old saying, actions speak louder than words.
Absolutely.
If executives are prioritizing security and they're demonstrating their commitment through their actions, it's going to trickle down throughout the entire organization.
You got it.
And that commitment needs to be, more than just lip service, I think.
It does. It needs to be backed up by resources, budgetary allocations for security initiatives, dedicated personnel, a clear chain of responsibility for those security-related decisions.
So we're talking about putting your money where your mouth is when it comes to security. It's not enough to just talk about it.
Exactly.
You got to invest in it.
You do. And that investment needs to be ongoing.
Right.
Because the threat landscape's constantly evolving, your security posture needs to evolve as well.
Makes sense.
So this means continuously evaluating your defenses, implementing new technologies, adapting your strategies to stay ahead of the curve.
It's a never-ending game of cat and mouse between the attackers and defenders.
It is.
So we've got strong leadership, a clear chain of responsibility, adequate resources. What would you say are some other key elements of effective security governance?
I would say metrics and reporting are super important. You need to be able to measure the effectiveness of your security program.
Okay, so how do we do that?
Well, you need to ask yourself, are your controls working? Are your employees following security protocols? Are you detecting and responding to threats effectively? Without data, you're flying blind.
Right. It's not enough to just have a security program in place.
Exactly.
You need to be able to prove that it's actually working.
Right, exactly.
Okay, so let's move on to slide 6, third-party risk management. Now, this is a big one.
This is a big one.
What do you think?
Well, in today's world, organizations rely so heavily on third-party vendors.
They do. For everything.
I mean, everything from cloud storage to payroll processing.
It's true.
And each of those vendors represents a potential point of vulnerability.
Right. It's like that old saying, a change is only as strong as its weakest link.
Exactly.
If one of your vendors has, lax security practices,
it
could put your entire organization at risk. I remember this case study from a few years back where a major retailer suffered a massive data breach because of a vulnerability in a third-party HVAC vendor system. Talk about a backdoor entry.
It's a very common scenario.
Really?
Organizations focus so much on securing their own systems, but they often overlook the risks posed by their vendors.
Right.
And the consequences, as you said, can be disastrous.
So how can organizations effectively manage third-party risk?
It starts with due diligence.
Okay.
Before you engage with any vendor, you need to thoroughly vet their security practices, request their security certifications, review their policies and procedures, assess their track record for handling security incidents.
It's like doing a background check on a potential roommate, right?
Exactly. You want to make sure they're not going to trash the place.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or steal your stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've done our due diligence. We've picked a good vendor.
Okay.
We can't just assume they're going to maintain that security posture forever.
Right. You need to regularly monitor their security practices, conduct periodic audits, include specific security requirements in your contracts with them.
Right. It's like having a lease agreement with your roommate that outlines the rules of the house. It helps to have things in writing so that everyone's clear on their responsibilities.
Exactly.
So, due diligence, ongoing monitoring, contractual requirements. What are some other best practices for third-party risk management? What else can we do?
Communication is key. Establish clear lines of communication with your vendors and make sure you have a process in place for reporting and responding to security incidents. You want to be notified right away if there's a breach or other security event that could impact your organization. You don't want to find out about it on the news.
Right. So you don't want to be caught off guard. Okay, let's move on to slide 7. Security in emerging technologies. Now, this is where things get really exciting.
Yeah, this is cutting-edge stuff.
Because we're talking about the future of cybersecurity, right? Things like artificial intelligence, the Internet of Things, quantum computing.
All very exciting fields, but they also present new challenges for security.
It seems like every time we take a step forward with technology, the attackers are right there with us, trying to figure out how to exploit those latest innovations.
It's a constant arms race.
So let's take a closer look at some of these emerging technologies and talk about the security implications they present. Let's start with artificial intelligence. What do you think?
Okay, sounds good.
So AI is everywhere these days, right? I mean, from self-driving cars to those virtual assistants, it's pretty amazing.
It's really incredible how fast it's developing.
But it also, I think, raises some interesting questions about security.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, what happens if an attacker hacks into an AI system
Right.
and starts manipulating its algorithms? I mean, that could be bad.
That could be very bad. That's a valid concern. AI systems, they're trained on massive data sets. And if that data is compromised or manipulated, it can have serious, serious consequences.
Right. I mean, imagine an AI system that's used for medical diagnosis.
Right.
And it's been fed false data.
Yeah, that's a scary thought.
It could lead to misdiagnoses, improper treatment.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And what about AI systems used for facial recognition?
Right.
If it's been trained on biased data, it could lead to wrongful arrests or other forms of discrimination.
Right. So it's not just about protecting these AI systems from being hacked.
Exactly.
It's about making sure the data they're trained on is accurate and unbiased.
Absolutely. And then you also have the issue of AI being used by attackers.
Oh, interesting.
We're already seeing examples of AI-powered malware that can learn and adapt to evade detection. And as AI technology continues to advance, we can expect to see even more sophisticated attacks in the future.
Right. So the attackers are using AI too.
Oh, yeah.
They are. So it's kind of like a cyber arms race.
Exactly.
The good guys are using AI to defend against attacks.
Right.
And the bad guys are using it to launch more sophisticated attacks.
Exactly.
So AI is definitely a double-edged sword when it comes to security. What about the Internet of Things? What do you think about that?
Well, the Internet of Things is another area that's growing so rapidly, and it presents some unique security challenges. We're talking about billions of interconnected devices.
Right.
Everything from those smart home appliances to industrial sensors, all collecting and transmitting data.
It's like our entire world is becoming a giant network of connected devices.
It is.
But the problem is, I think, that a lot of these devices were not designed with security in mind.
That's right. They often have weak passwords, outdated software, and no built-in security features.
Right, and that makes them easy targets for attackers.
Exactly.
I mean, attackers can exploit those vulnerabilities to gain access to sensitive data, maybe even take control of the devices themselves. Imagine if a hacker took control of your smart thermostat
Oh, no.
and cranked up the heat to 90 degrees in the middle of summer.
That would be terrible. Or what if a hacker took control of a self-driving car?
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Talk about a scary thought.
That's terrifying. So securing those IoT devices is going to be a major challenge in the years to come. What about quantum computing?
Well, quantum computing is still in its early stages, but it has the potential to really revolutionize computing power. And this poses a threat to current encryption methods, which rely on the difficulty of factoring large numbers. So, quantum computers could potentially crack the codes that protect our online transactions, our communications, and our sensitive data. Wow. So quantum computers could break the codes that protect everything.
Potentially, yes. And this is something that security experts are taking very seriously. They're already working on developing new encryption methods that will be resistant to quantum attacks.
So it's a race against time.
It is. As quantum computing technology continues to advance, the need for these new encryption methods becomes even more urgent.
So we've got AI, IoT, quantum computing. It seems like we're entering a whole new era of cybersecurity
We are.
with both exciting possibilities and, well, some pretty daunting challenges.
Definitely both. It's an exciting time to be in cybersecurity, that's for sure. And it brings us to our final slide, slide 8, summary and key takeaways. The key takeaway here is that building a robust cybersecurity framework is an ongoing journey, not a destination. It requires a multi-layered approach that addresses all aspects of security,
Right.
from the technology to the people to the processes. And it's important to remember that security is everyone's responsibility.
Right. It's a team effort.
It is. From the CEO to the intern, everyone has a role to play in protecting an organization's digital assets.
So what does all of this mean for our listeners today? What are some practical steps they can take to improve their own cybersecurity posture?
Well, I would say it starts with awareness.
Okay.
Stay informed about those current threats and vulnerabilities. Subscribe to security newsletters, follow reputable security blogs, and keep your software up to date.
Right. So those are great starting points. It's like keeping your eyes and ears open
Exactly.
and making sure your digital defenses are patched and ready for action.
You got it.
What else can our listeners do?
Practice good password hygiene.
Okay.
Use strong, unique passwords for all your accounts and enable multi-factor authentication whenever possible.
Right.
It's like having multiple locks on your front door.
Makes it a lot harder for those intruders to get in.
Exactly. And speaking of doors, we need to be careful about what we let into our digital homes as well.
Oh, that's a good point. Like what kinds of things?
Be cautious about phishing emails, suspicious links. Think before you click. If something seems too good to be true, it probably is.
Right.
And be wary of sharing personal information online, especially on social media. Remember, oversharing can make you an easy target for social engineering attacks.
Right. It's like being street smart, but in the digital world.
Exactly.
Don't trust strangers.
Right.
Don't flash your valuables. Be aware of your surroundings.
You got it. And if you're using public Wi-Fi, make sure you're using a VPN
Oh, good point.
to encrypt your connection.
Right.
Think of it like putting a shield around your data so those nosy neighbors can't snoop on what you're doing.
So, strong passwords, phishing awareness, social media smarts, VPNs for public Wi-Fi. What other tips would you give our listeners?
Back up your important data regularly. You never know when disaster might strike, a hard drive failure, ransomware attack, even a spilled cup of coffee.
Right. That's happened to all of us.
Having a recent backup can save you a lot of headaches.
It really can.
And heartache.
It's like having an insurance policy for your digital life. Speaking of insurance, what about cybersecurity insurance? Is that something our listeners should consider?
It's definitely becoming increasingly important, especially for businesses. It can help cover the costs associated with data breaches and other security incidents, but remember, insurance is not a silver bullet.
Right.
It's important to have those strong security practices in place first and foremost.
Right. So it's like wearing a seatbelt.
Exact.
It's a good safety measure. But it doesn't mean you should drive recklessly.
You got it. Security is all about layers of protection.
So we covered a lot of ground today, from policies and procedures to risk management to emerging technologies. What's the one key takeaway you want our listeners to remember?
That cybersecurity is a journey, not a destination.
Okay, I like that.
The threat landscape is constantly changing, so you need to be constantly learning, adapting, and evolving your security posture.
It's like staying in shape, You can't just work out once and expect to be fit forever. You got to make it a part of your lifestyle.
You got it. And just like with physical fitness, there are resources available to help you along the way.
Right.
Don't be afraid to seek expert guidance, join security communities, and stay informed about the latest threats and best practices.
Great advice. Well, this has been an incredibly informative deep dive into the world of cybersecurity. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us today.
It's been my pleasure.
And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this journey. Remember, knowledge is power.